What is up, YouTube? This is T Quentin1 coming at you with another video, and today I'm going to be talking to you about Imperium by Robert Harris, the first novel in his Cicero trilogy about the ancient Roman figure of the same name. I've been reading a lot of historical fiction this year, and some of my favorites have been by Robert Harris. I've read 3 books of his prior to Imperium: Pompeii, which I liked, I thought was pretty good; Officer and a Spy, which I really liked; and Fatherland, which I loved. So look, it's become a meme at this point, but it seems like every guy my age has some sort of fascination with ancient Rome, and I'm not an exception. It's just an interesting time period. Having said that, I went in knowing almost nothing about the actual historical events and context of this story. From what I understand, looking into it afterwards, it actually hews very closely, which is surprising because it's such an entertaining book that mashes a few different genres. So, if you don't know, Cicero wore a couple different hats in Rome. He was a senator, a philosopher, an orator, and a lawyer. And the book gives spotlights to all those different facets of his personality. For the first half, it mostly concerns a case that he prosecuted, and it basically reads like a Roman version of A Time to Kill. It is unapologetically a courtroom drama, and it's pretty sweet. Great dialogue, some of which taken directly from the actual Cicero's writings, and an interesting, winding conspiracy. Some of the most nail biting stuff in this book concerns the long, sleepless nights and anxiety centered around winning the jurors and uncovering evidence and crafting the perfect argument. A book doesn't have to be filled with giant battles and assassinations to be riveting, and the court stuff here perfectly illustrates that. Now, for the second half, Cicero's political life becomes more of a focus, and it evolves from a book that reminded me of John Grisham into a tale of corruption and cover ups that brought to mind 90s Oliver Stone. So, yeah, the best way to describe Imperium is that it's A Time to Kill mixed with JFK, but set in ancient Rome. It sounds pretty fucking sweet, right? Now, while I think this book is tremendously impressive on an intellectual level, I will say that I came away wishing I was more emotionally invested. Not that the book is without connection, but I was never as attached to the characters here as, say, the Lancasters in Connor Golden's War of the Roses, or the Brandon family in those Civil War books by James Reasoner I reviewed a couple years ago. It's an important thing in historical fiction, especially one dealing with characters with so many different schools of thought about them as the ones in this novel. Even aside from Cicero, I mean, Pompey, Caesar, Crassus, there's entire college syllabuses arguing both for and against these people all around the world. And don't get me wrong, they are entertaining. I liked reading about them, but I just wanted to care more. I wanted to have that moment where you're almost driven to tears in the third act. You know what I mean? You may think those are high expectations, but Harris has done it before. The ending of Fatherland left me speechless, staring up at the ceiling that night. And there were plenty of times in Officer and a Spy where my knees felt weak from just how much I wanted Picard to succeed. Imperium held my attention. It was amazingly constructed, but I always felt at a distance, like looking at a great piece of art, but not being allowed to touch it. Case in point, I've gotten this far in the review without even mentioning the actual main character of this book. It's told in first person from the perspective of Cicero's slave Tiro, and that's because he's kind of a blank slate. He's not totally without personality, and there is some stuff near the end that recontextualizes his relationship with his master, but not enough. There were honestly times where I forgot that this book was in first person, and then I'd get thrown by a personal pronoun. That might be the point. I feel like Harris was trying to have a best of both worlds situation. A slave could be an observer in all manner of important meetings without being a participant in them. It feels like you're looking at these meetings too, right? But I just don't think he gave Tiro enough of a character. An example of someone doing this exact idea better is Wilbur Smith's River God, where the main character and narrator is the eunuch slave Tita. But not only is he given plenty of depth and personal stakes in the story, by the end of that book, he had profoundly affected me. Not to shit on the character work here too much, because there are, of course, plenty of memorable and interesting folks here, most of whom, of course, really existed. Probably not too much of a surprise that Julius Caesar is a particular highlight. When I think of Caesar, I always think of this sort of action hero guy in armor, but I like that we saw him more as a schemer here, and no one quite knows what to make of him. I'm sure that'll become more important in the other books in this trilogy. And no matter how much I might complain about the emotional stuff being a little cold, ultimately I was gripped by this story. Imperium is a solid historical book. It's a good legal thriller and an interesting mystery. I liked this book, but I wanted to love it. And the closer you come to perfection, the more the flaws are noticeable. Still, it's a good read and worth an 8 out of 10. This is T. Quentin 1 signing out.